this video, we're going to be looking at the Wolfmix static screens. So the Wolfmix has 4 static screens. We have color, position, gobo, and live edit. Let's start by looking at the color screen. In the color screen, everything is arranged by column, similar to the home screen. So we have our colors for group A in the first column, colors for group B in the second column, group C is the third column, and group D is the fourth column. Of course, we can access groups E to H by holding Shift and tapping the BPM tap button. So we can change the color for each group using the buttons below. To keep things nice and simple, we'll just be looking at one group. So here we have 5 colors that we can choose from, but you can actually have up to 20 colors per group. So holding Shift and turning the encoder, I can scroll through the different pages. You can also tap the buttons on the top to page each group at the same time. If you want to view all 20 colors for a specific group, you can tap the relevant encoder. So now we're in expanded mode and we can see all 20 colors for group B. So this is really useful when you start triggering multiple colors in a group. So let's change this pattern from single to alternating. If I now trigger a second color, we now have an alternating pattern between cyan and pink. If I add in a third color, we have a third color, and so on. We can change this pattern from alternating to a central to outwards fade, or we can have the same effect with the fading removed. We can go in the opposite direction, again with the fading removed. We can go from left to right with a fade, or we can remove the fade. We can go from right to left, and of course we can remove the fade in that direction as well. So plenty of options for setting your colors. Of course, this is just using the default palette that you'll have when you start your Wolfmix, but any of these colors can be edited to your liking. If you hold Shift and then tap a button to edit, this will bring up the color picker. You can change the color using the touchscreen, or you can move the encoders. You can set specific DMX channel values using the RGB plus mode. So now you can adjust the red, you can change the amber value, you can adjust green or lime, you can have blue and UV control, and you can also change the white value as well. So if your fixture supports these channels, this is really useful. We also have a CMY mode for if your fixture uses CMY color mixing, and we have a hue saturation mode. So here you can adjust the hue, the saturation, and you can even dial in the proportion of color mixing from RGB to the extra channels such as white, amber, and lime. So let's say your fixture supports amber and lime control. Maybe you might want to have 80% set by the RGB channels and 20% set by the white, amber, and lime channels. We also have a grid which allows you to see the default palette. As always with the Wolfmix, if you want to save your changes, you can tap the flashing button, or you can tap anywhere else to discard. Let's take a look at the position screen. So this is going to work in much the same way as the color screen. We have everything arranged in columns. So of course, for this particular project, we only have 2 groups of moving fixtures. So we only see positions for groups A and B. We can choose any of these 5 positions over here, or we can hold Shift and turn the encoder to page to see the rest of the different positions we can have. As with the colors, you can have up to 20 positions per group. Let's jump to an empty position, hold Shift and tap to edit. And now we have the position picker. We can move the fixtures around using the touchscreen, or we can center them using the button at the top right. We can use the encoders to adjust the value, or hold Shift and turn to fine tune. We can set a focus offset. So the base focus value is actually going to be set in your Gobo screen, but for some positions you may need to set an offset to bring a bit more clarity depending on the distance that the beam has traveled. We can fan our fixtures outwards from the center, or we can fan them inwards to point a spot at the center. If I tap this encoder, we can access the cross feature. So this is going to take every other beam and cross them over from each other, like so. And we can also do this in the opposite direction, of course. Really powerful feature, this one. This also works in conjunction with the fan, so we can have the cross and we can still fan it outwards, or inwards, of course. Once you're happy with your position, you can give it a name. And as always, you can tap the flashing button to save, or anywhere else to discard. I'm going to save it this time. You can even set individual fixture position offsets within each position. So if I hold Shift and tap this position that we just made, then I tap this little button at the top, we now have our individual fixture offsets. So we can select a fixture using the fourth encoder. If you need to know which one you have selected already, you can tap this little on button to turn the beam on. And now we can adjust an individual offset for this fixture. So let's say I want to point up and over towards the center. Maybe now I want to do the same for fixture number 8. So I'll bring the tilt up and point it towards the center. Again, we can tap the flashing button to save. And now we have this position stored. You can also set a fade time between your different positions. So let's say I go to the floor position and I set a 3-second fade time, and now we click stage. So this is going to fade from one position to the next over 3 seconds. This is great for creating slow moving effects, or just making sure that everything runs smoothly as you adjust your positions. Let's take a look at the Gobo screen. So again, this is going to work in much the same way. We have our Gobos arranged in columns for each group. And again, this is only going to apply to groups A and B. So we can trigger the different Gobos. For group B, we can hold Shift and turn the encoder to page, or we can use the buttons at the top. We can start rotating the Gobo using the encoder. And then using the toolbar options, we can control some different parameters, such as prism. If I set this to 1%, the prism is now engaged. And as I keep rotating this value, the prisms begin to rotate with increasing speed. We have the focus value here. So as mentioned, this will be your base focus level, and you can always set an offset in each position. You can set a zoom level here, so we can make the beam very thin and sharp, or we can zoom it out to make it a lot wider. You can also set an iris value here if your fixture supports these controls. As with the previous screens, you can tap an encoder to expand and see the full list of 20 Gobos. And you can hold Shift and tap a spare slot to edit which Gobo appears in that slot. You can also give this a name up the top. Finally, we have the live edit screen. So this is a more advanced feature. Essentially, what the live edit screen allows you to do is to create custom buttons that can send static DMX values to any number of DMX channels. This is really useful for things like if you want to point a couple of fixtures at a mirror ball, or if you want a couple of fixtures to point at a specific spot on the stage. So what we have in this project is exactly that. We have a few different buttons that we can trigger, and they move those two fixtures to a specific spot, and they change the beam to white. So because live edits are a higher priority command, they actually override any of the statics or effects screens that you have set. So let's say I point these two fixtures at the singer. And now we go into the color effects screen. If I turn on the color effects, you'll notice that the fixtures remain pointed where they are and in a white color. If I trigger the move effects, again, they remain where they are and they remain white. So the only way to have these fixtures rejoin the effect is to manually disable the live edit. So we'll cover this in more detail in a later tutorial.